The wind howled outside the narrow window of a rusted garage as Armin tightened the last bolt on the strange-looking engine he'd spent nearly 6 years building. The air inside was thick with the scent of oil, iron, filings, and something else. Hope. Not the fleeting kind that flickers like a candle, but the heavy kind that weighs in your bones when you've given everything for something the world laughs at. Armin wasn't a man anyone would expect greatness from. He was quiet, reclusive, and visibly worn down by life. His neighbors in the small town of Kerper often saw him dragging heaps of scrap metal down the narrow streets or digging through piles of discarded electronics. Children pointed and laughed. Adults shook their heads. "That crazy boy's still chasing wind," they'd say. But Armin wasn't crazy. At least, not in the way they thought since he was a child. He'd had an obsession, not with money or fame, but with motion. He wanted to understand how things moved, why motors spun, and what gave life to a machine. His father, a bicycle mechanic, had once let him dismantle an old scooter engine. That afternoon, Armin didn't just play with metal, he listened to it. And when he put it back together working better than it had in years, his father looked at him not with pride, but fear. "You have too much hunger in you," he had said. "That hunger will starve you one day, but Armin only smiled. To him, invention wasn't a choice, it was breath. He spent years studying old blueprints, borrowing books from city libraries, and watching grainy YouTube videos at internet cafes. When he wasn't helping his ailing mother or fixing flat tires for pocket change, he was building bit by bit a motor that defied everything people knew about machines, not just any motor, a motor that ran without fuel. Not diesel, not petrol, not even electricity from a socket. It would move with stored atmospheric energy, converted through magnetic repulsion and mechanical resonance, terms that made people laugh when he tried to explain. "You think you're smarter than engineers? Rich companies can't do this. And you will using junk?" Armin didn't reply. He never did. He worked in silence and shadows, with the hum of his dreams louder than the voices outside. He sold his father's tools after his death to buy rare magnets. He dismantled broken washing machines for their coils. He melted aluminum cans for casing. And when his mother passed away after years of illness, partly because he couldn't afford her medicine, he buried his grief deep within the very gears he assembled. The world had taken much from him, but it would not take his belief. By the time he turned 26, the prototype was complete. It looked ugly, raw metal, exposed wires, bolts that jutted out like bones, but it was his. He named it Azad, free, but it didn't work. Not at first, for months. He turned it on, only to watch it spark and stall. Some days it made a faint hum. Other days it shook violently and cracked. Once it caught fire, and the neighborhood fire department laughed as they hosed it down. "You'll burn down the city chasing your ghost." "Armin," they joked. But every failure taught him something. He kept notebooks filled with sketches, corrections, and quiet prayers. He lived on tea, bread, and the rare kindness of a shopkeeper who believed he was simply eccentric, not insane. And then, one rainy night, when thunder rolled and the world outside had gone to sleep, Armin tried again. He reconfigured the rotors, aligned the magnets, rewound the coils, and connected the final wire. He placed the motor on a concrete block, braced himself, and pressed the button. At first nothing, then a soft hum, and then a spin, a quiet, perfect, endless spin. Armin's breath caught in his throat. The motor turned with no fuel, no battery, no external force. It was moving steady, smooth, free. He fell to his knees. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Not tears of victory, but release. Years of rejection, humiliation, and hunger melted into the sound of that spinning shaft. He had done it. He had proved the impossible, but celebration was short-lived. When he presented his invention to a local university's engineering department, they laughed him out of the room. "Perpetual motion is a myth," they said. "Even if it works. Now, it's flawed, it breaks the laws of thermodynamics." He tried again sending videos to companies, scientists, inventors. Most didn't respond. Some accused him of faking it. One engineer from Lahore even threatened legal action for spreading pseudoscience. The motor, they said, was too good to be true. So Arman turned to YouTube. He borrowed a friend's camera, recorded a simple demonstration, and uploaded the video. Fuel-less motor prototype, real or fake? Judge yourself. It was filmed in one take. No edits, no music. Just Arman, sitting beside Azad, explaining how it worked and letting it run. At first, the video got a few dozen views, then hundreds, then tens of thousands. Comment sections exploded. This guy is either a genius or a scammer. Wait. How is this spinning? I see no wires. If this is real, it could change everything. Arman didn't care about the insults. What mattered was that people finally looked. One day, a message popped into his inbox. It was from Dr. Faisal Imshiz, a Pakistani-born scientist working in Germany. He was skeptical but curious. He asked for blueprints, test data, and a live video call to inspect the setup in real time. Arman agreed. 3 days later, they spoke. Dr. Faisal watched the motor spin live over a video call. He asked Arman to dismantle parts, reconnect them, and run tests. After an hour, he leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "Either you're the greatest magician I've ever seen, or this is the beginning of something massive." He flew to Pakistan a week later. The moment he saw the device in person, he knew it wasn't a trick. This shouldn't work, he muttered over and over, but it does. News spread like wildfire, media outlets came knocking. Interviews followed. Scientists argued on national TV. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a hoax waiting to be exposed, but the motor kept spinning. More importantly, so did Arman. He was invited to speak at conferences, offered research partnerships, and even got a call from the Ministry of Technology. But Arman refused to sell his patent to private firms that wanted to bury it. This doesn't belong to corporations, he said. This belongs to the people. He partnered with a university that agreed to make the technology open source. His goal was not to become rich, but to inspire others like him. People with no degrees, no fancy labs, but hearts full of fire. In time, the motor was replicated, improved, and even used to power small machines in remote areas where electricity was scarce. Villages lit up at night for the first time using Arman's design. And while the scientific world still debated how such a device functioned with such efficiency, Arman kept building. He refused awards, stayed in the same neighborhood, and repaired bicycles in his spare time. When asked why he never left, he said, "The world gave me silence, but I found my voice here. This broken garage is my lab, my temple, my truth." Years later, textbooks around the world included a chapter titled The Kerper Motor, a case study in impossible innovation. But to Arman, it was never about being remembered. It was about proving that belief in yielding, unreasonable, and unrelenting can turn the impossible into metal, motion, and meaning. And as long as the motor spun, so did his faith in the human spirit. Arman didn't sleep much in the weeks after the motor went viral, not because he was anxious, but because his mind was on fire. For years, he had worked in isolation, feeding his soul with imagination and scraps. Now, his inbox overflowed with messages from curious minds, critics, and collaborators. Some wrote in awe, others in disbelief. A few wrote in anger, accusing him of undermining real science. He read every word, responded to many, ignored none. But even as the world began to take notice, something inside him remained unsettled. The motor, as it existed, was just the beginning. His mind had moved beyond the initial design. He saw a future where it wasn't just a desk prototype, it could power homes, transport, even factories in remote areas. Yet that leap required scale, resources, and infrastructure. Things he never had. Things he didn't entirely trust in. Other people's hands, the offers rolled in. Foreign investors, large engineering firms, and even intelligence agencies reached out, each waving contracts that promised fame, fortune, and global rollout. All they wanted was exclusivity, but Arman refused. He remembered watching his mother dim the lights to save on the electricity bill. Remembered days his father cycled through the heat just to avoid fuel costs. He remembered too well what it felt like to be powerless. I made this so people wouldn't be afraid of bills, he told one investor. Not so you could sell it. Back to them, some called him foolish. Some called him a hero, he didn't care what they called him. He kept working. Dr. Faisal remained his closest ally, acting as a scientific translator between Arman's instinctive genius and the skeptical scientific community. Together they refined the blueprint, eliminating flaws, improving stability, and building a version of the motor that could power a two-room home continuously without a single drop of fuel or connection to a power grid. They called it Azad 2. To test it publicly, Arman chose a remote village in Tharparkar, one of the hottest, driest, and least developed areas in the country. The village had no access to the power grid, no running water, and only one school with broken walls and a leaky roof. Children studied under candlelight. Women cooked in darkness. Nights were silent and long, when Arman and Dr. Faisal arrived. With a steel case containing the motor, the villagers were skeptical. We've seen people like you before, one elder said. They take photos, make promises, and never return. Arman didn't promise anything. He just asked for space in the school. Within 24 hours, the classroom had ceiling fans spinning, LED bulbs glowing, and a water cooler buzzing quietly in the corner. For the first time in the village's history, the children did homework at night under clean, white light. Their laughter echoed after sunset. Mothers gathered near the school, marveling at the cold water. And elders stood in silence, hands on hearts, watching the miracle machine hum gently in the corner. It wasn't magic. It was sacrifice turned into function. The video of this moment, posted by a teacher, went viral. Again, this time, international media picked it up. Headlines read, "Fuel-less motor powers Pakistani village overnight breakthrough," or "Illusion? The man who might change the energy game, science or sorcery." Meet Arman Khan, the inventor who broke the rules, suddenly. Arman was no longer just a YouTube curiosity, he was a headline, Universities began organizing seminars dedicated to analyzing the motor. Some physicists still denied its validity, claiming hidden energy sources or measurement errors. But others began asking different questions. What if we've misunderstood the rules? What if innovation isn't always neat or academic? What if brilliance sometimes hides in garages, not labs? Despite the fame, Arman refused to move to a bigger city. He still lived in his late parents' small home, though he now had a modest lab built in the backyard. Volunteers came from across the country to learn. He didn't charge them. He welcomed them like family. One boy, 15 years old, traveled from Peshawar with nothing but a notebook and a broken multimeter. Arman gave him food, a place to sleep, and hours of guidance. The boy stayed for 6 months, then returned home and built a simplified version of the motor that powered his family's well pump for free. That boy now teaches rural tech in government schools. Stories like this began to multiply. Arman's invention became more than a device, it became a movement. Azad Tech, the nonprofit he later formed with Dr. Faisal, trained hundreds of young minds, helping them replicate and apply fuel-less technology to everyday village life. Fans, lights, pumps, even electric bikes powered by motors built from recycled material and Arman's open-source design, and yet, not everyone was pleased. Energy corporations began lobbying to classify Arman's work as unverified science, to limit its distribution. One company filed a case alleging national economic sabotage, arguing that widespread use of Azad motors could disrupt energy markets and hurt fuel-based economies. Arman was summoned to court. A small-town mechanic stood in front of corporate lawyers in black suits. presenting homemade graphs and hand-drawn diagrams. The judge, curious but cautious, assigned an independent panel of international engineers to evaluate the motor. For 2 weeks, they ran tests. They dismantled it, reassembled it, monitored it 24/7 in a sealed environment. It passed every test, the report concluded, while the exact principles behind the energy generation appear unconventional and not yet fully understood within traditional frameworks. The motor operates as claimed without fuel input or external energy. The court ruled in Arman's favor. That day, as he exited the building, journalists swarmed him. One asked, "What's next for you, Arman? Where does this all go from here?" He looked up at the sky, hands in his pockets, and said, "We go where the light hasn't reached yet." The following months were a blur. Arman declined awards from international organizations, though he appreciated the recognition. He continued speaking at rural schools, helping young dreamers build their first circuits. He even wrote a small handbook titled Yiz Din Bijli Nahi Aayi, The Day Power Didn't Come, filled with simple ideas on how to build energy alternatives. Using everyday junk. In time, other inventors improved his design. Versions of Azad began appearing in India, Nigeria, Peru, and Indonesia. Farmers ran motors off-grid. Flood-affected areas kept medical fridges cool using mini-Azads. A wheelchair. Company partnered with Azad Tech to create affordable, self-recharging mobility chairs. And Arman. He never stopped building. On his 30th birthday, he unveiled Azad 3, a motor powerful enough to run a small electric car. When he took it for a test drive down the streets of Kerper, children ran beside him, cheering. Old neighbors once? Skeptics watched in awe. One of them, an elderly shopkeeper who had once called him useless, placed a garland around his neck and said, "We didn't understand you, Beta. But you never stopped believing. Thank you for not giving up." Arman smiled, his eyes soft. "Thank you for doubting me. It kept me sharp." Later that night, he sat alone in his garage, the same one where it all began. The concrete floor was still stained, the walls still had scribbles. But the silence was different now, not heavy. Not hollow, just full. He picked up a small, rusted screw, one of the first he had used on the original Azad. He placed it on the shelf and whispered, "We did it, we really did it." And outside, the wind moved gently, not as a storm, but as applause. Years passed, but the sound of the motor never stopped. In villages, in homes, in classrooms once forgotten by power grids, Azad continued spinning quietly, steadily, endlessly. What had once been dismissed as fantasy was now part of daily life for thousands. But just as the world began to accept Arman's creation, a shadow fell across his path, a storm more complex than any he had faced before. A major international energy conglomerate, Dynacor International, launched a coordinated campaign to discredit him. They filed patents they didn't invent, claimed proprietary rights to certain components, and even pressured countries to restrict the import of Azad-based motors. Their reasoning? Global energy security and economic stability. Some governments listened. Others didn't, but the pressure was undeniable. Suddenly, Arman began losing access to critical components. Raw materials were harder to import. Partner universities were encouraged to pause collaborations. His lab was even visited by officials who claimed to be checking compliance. Social media was flooded with fake news stories saying Azad was harmful or unverified or a threat to economic order. It didn't take long for fear to return. Donors hesitated. Projects slowed. Some villagers, hearing rumors that the motor could cause illness, disconnected the systems he had given them. At night, Arman watched videos of homes going dark again, not because the motor had failed, but because fear had won. He felt exhausted. It was the first time in years he questioned himself. Not the invention, but the battle. He spent nights sitting beside the motor, watching it spin, listening, searching for the clarity that used to come so easily. But this time, there was no answer. No diagram to fix this, and then the worst. News came. Asterisk Dr. Faisal, his closest ally, his brother in science, the one who helped him rise from obscurity, had been diagnosed with cancer. It was advanced. Arman rushed to Germany to be with him. For 3 weeks, he sat at his bedside, reading aloud their old notebooks, recalling every small victory. They laughed. They cried. They remembered asterisk and then Dr. Faisal with a weak voice. And a smile that barely formed said something that stayed with Arman forever. Asterisk, don't fight for acceptance. Fight for access. We didn't build Azad to be believed. We built it so no one would be left behind. 2 days later, Dr. Faisal passed away. Arman returned to Pakistan with a heavy heart and a burning mind. Grief carved something new into his spirit, not sorrow, but direction. He reorganized Azad Tech. He opened every single blueprint of the motor to the public. No license, no patent restrictions, no permissions needed. He created video tutorials in Urdu, Hindi, Pashto, Swahili, and Spanish. He formed online groups where people from every corner of the globe could collaborate, share improvements, solve problems together. Asterisk, what Dynacor had tried to stop with money and power, Arman countered with something far more dangerous. Freedom. Asterisk, Azad was no longer his, it belonged to everyone. And it worked. Asterisk, makers in South Africa built versions that powered hospitals. Farmers in Indonesia used them for irrigation. Indigenous communities in the Amazon adapted the design to store solar overflow. A group of teenage girls in Turkey created a mini Azad kit for schools, winning a global science prize. Asterisk, Arman watched it all unfold from his quiet workshop, surrounded by letters from people he had never met, but whose lives he had touched. Letter from a blind engineer in Egypt who said Azad gave him a reason to build again. A letter from a young boy in Afghanistan who used the motor to power his school's printer. A letter from a single mother in Punjab who ran a sewing machine from Azad to feed her children. Asterisk, he realized then his job wasn't to protect the motor. It was to release it. Asterisk, still, threats continued. Dynacor tried suing him in international courts, but the case was dismissed. They tried tarnishing his name, but his silence and work spoke louder than any defense. Asterisk, when journalists asked why he didn't fight them with press releases and lawyers, Arman replied, they want war. I build peace. Asterisk, one summer evening, nearly a decade after the first motor spun to life, Arman stood in a massive hall in Islamabad, invited to receive the Global Citizen Innovation Medal. He wore the same clothes he always wore, simple shalwar, kameez, sandals, and an old wristwatch that belonged to his father. Asterisk, he walked to the podium and looked at the crowd. Cameras flashed. Ambassadors, scientists, children, laborers, politicians, they all waited. He cleared his throat and spoke with the same quiet strength he had always carried. I am not the smartest man in this room. I am not the richest. I am not even the most educated. But I had something many people never get. I had a reason to keep going. That reason was you. All of you. And your stories became my engine. He paused, then added, when I first built Azad, no one believed it could work. But I didn't build it to prove a point. I built it so no child would ever again go to sleep in the dark because his parents couldn't afford power. I built it so that our people ignored, mocked, forgotten could rise. Not by fighting, but by spinning forward. Asterisk, the hall rose in applause. Not polite applause, but thunderous, honest, grateful applause. Asterisk, Arman stood still, tears forming quietly. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were peace. In the years that followed, Azad became a standard open-source technology in more than 40 developing countries. It was not flawless, but it was fearless. People adapted it to their needs, made it better, faster, cleaner. Asterisk, and Arman? He remained in Khairpur. Asterisk, he taught children in his yard, fixed old radios, cooked biryani for visitors. His name became legend, but he never acted like one. Asterisk, because to him, the real invention wasn't the motor. It was belief. The belief that one person, with no money, no platform, and no support, could still change the world if they were willing to give their entire heart to something bigger than themselves. Asterisk, The belief that light could come not from wires or bills but from within, and so the motor spins, and so does the world. Asterisk.